You're listening to the Monday Night Community Show with Daniel on BRFM.
This is the Daniel Monday Night Community Show on demand through YouTube. Thank you very much for choosing to listen to us through this method. If you'd like to keep up to date with when I add new interviews, then subscribe to this channel. Now we're going to be talking to Dave. Dave, as always, it's great to speak to you here at BRFM.
It's great to be here again. It seems quite a long time since we actually last spoke, and I think the sun was still shining in the sky, wasn't it? Something like that?
Yes, I think last time we spoke actually was I come down to you at the plots.
That's
and
right.
Then along to your show. So actually you coming up here to the studio is a fair while ago.
Yes, it's a good 2 or 3 months actually, but it's delightful to be here again. Thank you for inviting us.
Well, I was hoping, Dave, you could do our usual sort of introduction about the Society before we move on to our areas this evening.
Well, the SHS, let's call it the SHS, Sheppey Horticultural Society, is always a mouthful, put it that way. The SHS has been going for well over half a century and currently has, I think at the last count a couple of days ago, was 217 members. And that's from across the island, as well as some from off the island as well. So we're international, so to speak. But we run 2 sites in Sheerness, one at Richmond Street and Nursery Close, and another little larger site at Medway Road. Membership falls over a wide range of ages, from the more experienced allotmenteers who work on their plots or who've worked on their plots for many years, down to newer members who will have taken over a plot just this year, or half a plot. We like to introduce people to half plots or 5-rod plots so that they're not manageable, if it's not too confused a sentence to actually use. So not all our members actually cultivate an allotment. For a nominal £1.50 joining fee, you can still have the advantage of being a member of the society, and that allows you to use our site-run shops, where we're able to offer all manner of gardening items: seeds, plants, fertilisers, composts, pots and plant trays. So 217 members, 2 sites, Medway Road and Richmond Street. That's the Sheppey Horticultural Society in full.
I was hoping you could next let us know if there's any plants that you can be planting at this time of year.
It's quite an active period, believe it or not, actually. On the vegetable side, certainly where allotments are concerned, and gardens as well. Why should we exclude gardens? On the vegetable side, many will have been busy over the last few weeks. And in fact, the last month or something like that, actually, planting things like winter onions. These are onions which go in now and will be ready a little bit earlier next year, actually June, something like that. So when you're running out of onions, or you feel that you can't go and buy one. So garlic, for instance, also should be being planted around this particular time. Garlic is one of those strange things. You plant it quite deeply, but it actually needs a period of cold. A lot of people were complaining, certainly a lot of allotmenteers were complaining last year, that we didn't get that cold on the island, which garlic actually needed. So sometimes I've even heard of people putting their garlic bulbs or their garlic cloves in the fridge for a few days. Whether it works or not, I've never tried it, and I must admit. So things like garlic cloves, winter onions, broad beans, for instance, also can go in at this particular time of the year. What they'll do is they'll probably put their heads up above the ground and then stop growing for the winter. But the advantage of that is that they will get away that much quicker in the springtime. And the dreaded blackfly tends to miss them. You get the tender tips of broad beans, for instance. So sometimes if you're putting them in later or in the early spring, they'll become infested with the dreaded blackfly, which means, of course, you've got to eradicate the blackfly. Broad beans put in at this time of the year, or this side of Christmas actually, tend to be cleaner where that's concerned. Things like winter lettuces and brassicas as well, all of those kinds of things. For some winter and early spring colour on the flower garden, on the flower side of it, there's many flowering plants and bulbs. We've all seen cyclamen, any number of spring bulbs already in the shops, already in the garden centres, ready to go in. Things like narcissus, daffodils, tulips, winter pansies, cyclamen, for instance, very, very colourful over the Christmas period. Be careful, though, because there's an interior or an indoor cyclamen as well as an outdoor cyclamen. A very pretty early spring flower, which is, and I think I mentioned it before, muscari, or also known as grape hyacinth, which will form very attractive blue clumps in a couple of years' time, ready for spreading, ready for digging up and passing out around the garden. There's blue and white varieties available of those, and obviously we mustn't forget the colourfully varied crocus, the crocus that suddenly arrives from absolutely nowhere when you drive past. It seems to be beloved by county councils or borough councils, cyclamen absolutely everywhere, and why not, in fact. So yeah, there's an awful lot that can actually be put in at this particular time of the year. It's a strange year, actually, because in my own garden, funnily enough, I still have fuchsias which are blooming. It's a weird year. You've probably found this in your own garden as well.
Yeah, we've got the what we call the bunny rabbits, or is it antirrhinums?
Antirrhinum.
Yeah, they're still in full flower, like it's summer at the moment.
My wife has actually said that she must go down to the bottom of the garden and cut the roses. I'm thinking, roses? And I haven't looked, because you tend not to look at this particular time of the year. But no, we still have roses fully in bloom, actually,
yeah,
which is absolutely delightful. So yeah, there's an awful lot that you can actually plant. Don't forget, of course, it's also the time to plant bare-rooted bushes, shrubs and fruit trees. This is the time when the plant is actually dormant, and it'll get away that much quicker earlier in the new year when the soil and the temperature tends to warm up. So yeah, there's an awful lot that can actually be bought and planted at this time of the...
I think, Dave, we were going to continue actually talking all about the sort of things you can be getting on with in the garden and the allotment over the next couple of weeks or so to come.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that, actually. My throat kind of died on me. I apologise. I apologise to your listeners. But it's very much a time for repair and mend, clearing away the rubbish, the kind of rubbish that may have escaped your notice by being hidden under trees and bushes and shrubs and what have you, the green bits of your garden throughout the summer, or behind the plants. If you've got a greenhouse, for instance, cleaning up, wiping down the glass, very usual. My greenhouse is actually green at this particular moment where the glass is. I've got to actually wipe off all the mildew and all that kind of detritus which is collected over the summer weeks, and get rid of any broken diseased branches as well as spindly stems or those that cross and are growing inwards. There's always an advantage in having a bush which is growing outwards, in a sense. If you hold your hand and your fingers outstretched, always think of it as a spindly cup, and with the centre quite light and airy. That'll allow, as I say, more light to the centre of the plant, and it also allows the air to circulate as well. There's nothing worse than stagnant air, which collects within crossed and, how can I say, plants which are overgrown in that sense. It'll also help to cut down disease, particularly true of fruit trees. If you're either growing in your garden, prune grapevines back. I have a huge grapevine in my garden, which I've just about started to look at. The leaves are absolutely everywhere. Great, they'll form a great mulch, but it's a case of having to sort of prune it back, and quite severely. I'm sure as I start at one end and finish at the other, I'm sure the end I started has actually grown back again by a good 6 inches or so. It's that prolific. That's the kind of thing that you can actually be getting on with. Tidy yellowing dead leaves from around brassicas if you're growing them in your garden or on the allotment, for instance, and it keeps the plot neat, and it also, again, discourages pests. Check any stored vegetables or fruit that may be showing signs of rotting, and make sure you remove them, like potatoes that you may have dug up, onions that you may already have dug, for instance. It's always a good thing to actually check, and keep checking until you've actually consumed or used all of the vegetables that you actually run. Dig in the summer-sown green manures like clover, mustard, so that they can start to break down the soil. So there's an awful lot that you can actually be doing at this particular time of the year, weather permitting.
And Dave, looking a little bit more to the future, what can we be getting more on with for the next sort of couple of months or so in the allotment and the garden?
I think, although we've already said that it's a quieter time for the plot, and it's a time of plot or garden, whatever, for any gardening, it's also a time for reflection, but there are plans that can be made for the following seasons. You might want to plan some changes in your garden, or certainly to the allotment. Allotments are cyclical anyway. There's the 4 beds, for instance. Leave one unplanted, but change them around from year to year to year so that you don't build up diseases. and nasties in the soil. So you might want to plan some changes, looking closely at what's not perhaps been so successful, or looking out for new varieties that could be attractive or will complement what you've already got. Actually, there's always new varieties and new species actually coming in. In fact, it's very... I must have, about this time of the year, or certainly next spring anyway, I must have one of those when they introduce a new variety. There's always a patch that you've forgotten to dig, so if the ground is soft enough, get it dug over. Having said, if it's too muddy and what have you, keep off it for a little while, let it dry out a little bit. It might just be the final position for one of those bare-rooted bushes that you healed in, or that you've actually bought very recently. You remember your previous question to me, that you may have bought a short while ago. Look to your tools and sharpen them up. Don't forget, of course, you've probably been using them for months and months on end. I'm not saying that you haven't been sharpening them already, but make sure that they are sharp. So if they've got blunt or worn through a great deal of use, there's always something to be said for Christmas, actually. Can I have a new tool to actually till the ground with, please? Please. Check the cables of electrically powered tools. I've said this before, and I will say it every time that we come to meet at this particular time of year. There's everything to be said for electrically powered tools being checked and making sure that the cables, at the very least the cables, are safe and secure. So one last tip. As you'll notice, it's probably going to get a little bit colder this week. The weatherman has been warning us that it'll be a little colder. So have the fleece, the bubble wrap, straw, the newspaper sacking, any suitable item ready that'll help or wrap up and protect your less hardy plants. I've got 2 lemons in the garden, for instance, and they are now being fleeced up, ready for the winter. They will hopefully survive quite well under a fleece. Don't forget, though, that having said that, if you cover up a plant, then it must breathe properly. So there's something to be said when it's warmer during the day to actually taking the fleece or the covering off. But overnight, if there's a risk of frost, putting that covering back on. Sound advice, just simple advice, because some plants are very expensive, and if you lose that, lose the plant to frost, it's on your own head, be it, in a sense. But just before we finish, don't forget to feed the birds and provide some fresh water. It's that time of the year when the birds are starting to look for food. And don't forget, they're going to be your best friends next year, come January, February, March, when the pests and the pesties and the little critters start to come out of the woodwork after. Don't forget, they hibernate as much as anything else, actually. So it's... there are any number of tips. It literally is months and months wide, and perhaps in a later question I can come on to a couple of the tips a little bit later in one of your later questions.
Dave, do you actually have any useful tips for us at this time of year?
I think as winter comes on, it's important to cut back the perennials and the border plants, those kind of straggly plants which have really fulfilled their promise over the summer, but which are now fallen down and covering all kinds of unwanted things, notwithstanding all that rubbish that you've piled underneath the plants. Another useful tip is use a handful of grit to mark the sites of lilies and bulbs, which will probably stay in the ground, so that you don't work that area when you're planting or replanting in the spring. There's nothing worse than actually having planted something this year and it's given you its best display, and then you come along and you start digging and forking over, only to actually fork up a prize lily or something like that, and thinking, I've just destroyed a plant which I forgot where it actually was. So little indicators or markers as to where you've planted things in beds or on the ground, actually. Beware of a sudden frost, which can bring an end to any remaining display, so protect the more tender plants. We were talking about some of the things that you've still got in your garden, for instance, the antirrhinums. Yeah. Protect them for as long as you possibly can. Wherever possible, I would move containers to a protected and sheltered place for the winter. If you've got a big enough greenhouse, put them in an unheated greenhouse, but certainly put them in a sheltered place, remembering that over extended periods of dry weather, even in the winter, you may still need to water the plants which remain in them. So if you can move the pots, a lot of people now use pots, and I use a lot of pots to dot around the garden, because you can change the garden that way. Actually, you can always hide the pots as well. So put them in a sheltered position, not forgetting, of course, that they still need a little bit of water to them. We've mentioned cleaning and sharpening tools. Clear fallen leaves and remove any unwanted moss from the steps. We all know we walk outside not thinking it's going to be dry and what have you. Moss on the steps, whap, over you go. And you could injure yourself. Nobody wants to be going to any hospitals at this time of the year, certainly not just before the Christmas period. Improve lawn drainage if you can actually get onto the lawn, or the grass, put it that way. I know we've talked about mud and what have you. So again, weather permitting, you can improve your lawn drainage by spiking the grass with a garden fork or an aerator. I've even seen people put 4-inch nails on their feet on a piece of wood, would you believe, and walk all over the grass. Great way of doing it. And then forgetting they're on their feet and walking into the house with them. I've actually seen that, would you believe? That is not a joke, I accuse you. And brush grit or sand into the holes, and what that will do is aerate the soil a bit more. But as I say, be careful not to compact the soil too much. Remember to continue feeding, watering the wild birds over the winter period. Again, I will repeat that. They're your friends. And I said this, I think, last year, at about Christmas point. Lots of people buy poinsettias, and I will probably buy a poinsettia as well. These very showy red bracts that appear in garden centres and shops around this time of the year. So if you've actually bought one of those, don't forget to wrap it up well, because it's a native of Mexico and it's grown in quite, pretty warm temperatures. Moving it from the shop, which is a warm temperature, to the car and then driving home, it'll be cooler. And you could, in fact, run the risk of losing the bracts off this quite expensive plant. And one other thing, we're coming up to Christmas, aren't we? So if you've got an established or a potted Christmas tree, don't move it into a much warmer house until as late as possible. I know it means dressing the tree later than usual, but don't move it into a warmer house too soon. Remember to keep the tree very well watered over the Christmas period, and that applies to ones which are rootless, and certainly to potted Christmas trees. Everybody tends to want to move the Christmas tree in at the end of, or the beginning of December, to try and get as much work out of it as possible. But if you can delay that as much as possible, the tree will be better for it.
Dave, how much will an allotment plot actually cost for the year?
It's strange you should ask that, because we've just very recently, in one of our last meetings, actually discussed fees and rents for next year, for 2015. And we've kept them exactly the same as they've been for the last couple of years, actually. So currently they're £41.50 per annum for a 10-rod plot, which is about 70-odd feet by 30-odd feet wide. Quite a huge area in which to grow plants and which to grow vegetables on an allotment. So for a 10-rod allotment, the total is £41.50. That is made up of ground rent for £25, water rate £15, because water, unfortunately these days, as we all know and have become aware, is quite expensive, and the society subscription of £1.50, which I mentioned previously. 5-rod allotment, the ground rent is £12.50, the water rate is £7.50, and again the society subscription is £1.50, and that gives you a grand total of £21.50. As I said earlier this evening, anybody coming new to allotmenteering is offered, let's say, a 5-rod plot, because that is, we think, is sufficient to actually get you into the whole modus operandi of having an allotment and actually growing on a plot. So you can see very reasonable rates, which we've already held for 2015.
And Dave's sort of something I'd like to cover, and I know you'd like to cover that as well. And it's what you'd recommend to somebody who's interested in becoming a member of the society and going on to have their own plot.
I think the first thing you should do is discuss it with your family. Of course, if it's a family enterprise, or if you have children, what have you, whether wife or whatever. partner. Involve them in your plans. It's very much a family affair these days. We have children on both our sites, actually. Warmly welcomed, I do assure you, because they are the future of allotmenteering. Read up on the subject. For instance, what are your aims? What do you want to grow? How much time do you want to devote to the plot? There's always a minimum amount of time that you should be able to devote to the plot, whether it's in the evening, in the high summer, whether it's in the morning, certainly at weekends. It's great at weekends. You'd be surprised that allotmenteering is not necessarily a 24/7 pastime. A few hours will suffice a week, actually. I think what's also important is not to be too ambitious to start with. We've mentioned newcomers coming onto the plots, offering them a 5-rod plot. We can offer more people 5-rod plots by splitting a 10-rod up, but it's sufficient to get you really grounded into allotmenteering or gardening. Develop your skills and don't be afraid to ask for advice. I'm still asking for advice, actually. No gardener ever stops learning. Best of all, I think, is what you get out of the ground, actually, or what you can actually pick. You get to eat the fruits of your labours. No puns intended, Daniel, I apologise. And take pride in what you've grown for your dinner table, or display, because quite a few allotmenteers actually grow flowers, non-edible stuff. It augments an allotment. Quite a few grow dahlias, for instance, on the plots, and other floral things for floral arrangement. The exercise you put in is basically a free fitness and fresh air program as well. There are no gym fees involved. There's obviously the rental, but it's nowhere near gym fees, which I'm given to understand can be quite expensive these days. Believe it or not, even though you're in the middle of a quite largish town, Sheerness, quite large, quite busy, there's time and space to switch off for a while. So, yeah, there's much to recommend allotmenteering. There's much to recommend gardening. And the more people that do it, the better I think it actually does. And obviously, we would like to see more members. As I said to you right at the beginning, we have something like 217 members at this particular time. That was at the last count. And we give a very warm welcome to anybody coming to see us at either of our sites or shops, which are open on Sundays between 9 and noon. You've been down on the Sunday morning and seen how busy during the summer those shops actually get. Information, can I buy this, can I buy that? The amount of compost that gets carried out one of those sheds on a Sunday morning in the summer, you would not believe. And at Medway Road, come and meet Amanda and Tom Beresford at Medway Road, or Brian Williams at Richmond Street. They would make you very, very welcome, and would be delighted to see you, as would any allotmenteer who's there on the Sunday morning between the hours of 9 and 12.
Dave, as always, thank you very much for coming along this evening and doing our regular slot. And once again, a big thank you to you and the Sheppey Horticultural Society for letting us do our project Art Transmission with you as well.
I think it was a great project. We thoroughly enjoyed it. A lot of people didn't quite understand what it was about at the beginning. To actually say, art in sound, in effect, was a new departure for a lot of people. But once they'd listened to it, and if you remember when we went across to the Sittingbourne Light Railway, for instance, where I heard the first of our particular slots for the first time, it was so atmospheric. And I suddenly thought, is that really Richmond Street and is that really Medway Road? She did a superb job, I think, Kate Chapman, as they all did, actually. The noises were unique across each of those particular projects. So we were very pleased to actually take part. And people, as I say, still talk about it. And people still run it on occasions. And I'm sure they now know what art in sound is all about. It's a new arm to artistic endeavour, so to speak.
As always, Dave, thanks.
Pleasure.
That's Dave Hale from the Sheppey Horticultural Society right here at BRFM on the Monday Night Community Show. And if you would like to hear that sound that was produced by Kate Chapman working with the Sheppey Horticultural Society, it is still available online on demand as a podcast through the YouTube channel. You can find it directly on youtube.com by searching Art Transmission Sheppey Horticultural Society, or by going to our website brfm.net and clicking on the little YouTube icon and looking for that piece of sound art in the playlist section of the YouTube channel.